I hope you had lovely field work today. We did. We did mostly driving to neighborhoods on the outskirts of Halifax, looking in places where we thought incomes might be low, and we wondered if the canopy was different there than it is in some of the better to do neighborhoods. And we found that the canopy was different rather than smaller. Very, very interesting, different distribution of tree species, spatial distribution, and so on. So we had a good morning. But so here we are in the afternoon with two agendas, one of which might take us an hour and the other one of which might take us half an hour, so we can start our weekends a little bit earlier than we have ended the days previously. So the first order of business is to hear from each student. Wait till I get my cursor in the right place here. To hear from each student what they think about the three questions that I put. The first one of which was, what's the most promising or positive aspect of canopy cover management you learned during the week? And then secondly, what was the most depressing or the most negative aspect of canopy cover management you learned during the week? And because we're a research network, I thought it would be interesting to hear from you folks, the students and postdocs. What do you think is the, would you highlight one major uncertainty that should be identified as a high priority for research? And so each person has 2 minutes. I won't be ruthless, but I will be monitoring. And I thought that the way to go would be some kind of alphabetical order, but the poor people whose names begin with A or B, they're always first. And so I thought we would go in reverse alphabetical order of surnames. And you probably haven't got a clue where you sit in the order when we do it backwards, but that's what I've suggested we do. Now there are several.
We could just use the participant list in the.
I have the participant list, Benoit. I've worked it all out. We're going in reverse alphabetical order just so that we don't get too much of one place because many of the part of the list was organized by city. So one of the problems I had was to figure out whether the middle name was part of the surname or part of the given name, but we'll go with it anyway, the way I have it here. So that would bring up Kit Wong-Stevens first. Do we have Kit in?
Yeah, no, you got it right. Wong was part of the last name.
Yeah,
so I'll try to keep it quick. So I guess the most promising thing from this whole week is that in the city of Toronto, they do seem to be moving towards a more holistic understanding of canopy and focusing more on quality of canopy instead of quantity, as well as they've seemed to be doing a lot with public engagement as well and getting the public engaged in that and understanding that. The most depressing thing, and I feel like this will probably be similar for most of the cities, but the city of Toronto really does seem to be struggling with resources. They were saying, so they have like 86 ecologically sensitive areas, but they only have 10 people to manage it. So it really just seems to be a resources and funding issue. And there also seems to be some issues with political support where perhaps the city's more holistic understanding of canopy doesn't necessarily align with, what city councilors might think, who are maybe more interested in reaching just a certain percentage without wanting to look at maybe more quality and what it means to have invasive species, non-native species where we're planting our trees. And a thing to do more research on, I think, would really be in, and this is just because I'm also really interested in equity and governance, but I think it would be interesting to look at the city of Toronto, especially with some of the larger public engagement projects they're doing, to maybe do some research on levels of collaboration and communication between different departments, and maybe the decision making that goes into some of these more holistic quality based decisions they're trying to make about canopy and some of the movements they have towards that. And that's it for me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kit. That would bring up Julien Vachon next.
Thanks. Hello. For me, I think the most promising aspect of canopy cover management is the movement that we see in Montreal, but elsewhere, to institutionalize it through rules, procedures, and plans. I believe that this is an important aspect of durability of such a management, be it canopy cover or any other challenges. And most of you know my background is in public health, and what is a bit depressing for me is to see that a lot of the same challenges in urban forest management we see in public health regarding questions of stewardship and ownership. Ownership in the sense of feeling responsible for of trees and the urban forest in general. And I think the urban forest sector and the health sector could learn from one another regarding this question of responsibility of ownership, since it's a big field of research in health, in the health sector. And a high priority of research for me would be the adaptation and management of trees in urban forests regarding climate change, considering that losing the urban forest would be disastrous on many levels, and that this scenario is quite possible in light of all the climate and weather tipping point and feedback loops that may happen in any of the next few decades. And thanks all. That's been a very interesting week. Thank you.
Thanks, Julien. Sarah Cardiff.
Yes, hi everyone. So the most promising aspect of canopy cover management for me, from what I saw this week, is that more and more municipalities feel concerned by the increase of canopy cover, and this is a good point because it wasn't the case a few years ago. I think 10 or between 10 or 20 years ago. So this is a good, this is an encouraging point. For the most depressing aspect about canopy cover management, I think that citizens are not enough informed about the ecological aspect and the health aspect, health benefits of the canopy cover. For example, for the ecological aspect, why we encourage to plant different species and not only one, or yes, all the ecological aspect benefits of this of the increase of canopy cover, and to plant trees in private, or yes, it's more for private areas. And for the health, that cardiovascular diseases can be avoided by this or reduced by tree planting. So citizens are not enough informed about this, I think. And the high priority for research is linked to this last point. To first, to involve more the people in decision. I think about making more collaborative workshops, as Camilo said yesterday. I think it's a good idea to involve those people in the canopy cover management of their cities. And also another point is to make the data open, so open data, the databases open to everyone. And first, to make the link between different databases, because we saw this week that in Montreal, there are a lot of databases and they are not linked all together. So this is the first point, and then to make them open to everyone, every citizens, to be more informed.
Lovely, thanks, Sarah. Jérémy Saint-Pierre, are you on the? Yeah, there you are.
Yes. Okay. So for me, the positive aspect about this week was to listen to all the people that we encounter and to know their strategy and their motivation to increase canopy cover. It was a great overview and really motivating. But as someone who studies soils, what shocked me the most is the poor soil quality that some trees grows in. Sometimes it seems to be like pure rocks, and I find it it's ideal is to think that young trees will grow in soil that has close to non-organic matter content and probably a very small density and diversity of microfauna and mesofauna. But I understand that provide a living soil is costly and that moving soil within or across the city, it's complicated. So I think that the more studies should be made about the benefits of long grass, shrubs, and perennials that grow with planted trees, or compare the growing performance of trees that grow or that are planted with and without understory vegetation. Because I think they could at least provide an enrichment of organic matter each year with the accumulation of leaf litter. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Anik, you would be next.
Yeah, hi. Just take a look. Before, a few years ago, I had a big Norway maple in front of my house, and now there's not. So I'm all in the sun. It's really hot in my living room right now. But despite they replaced my Norway maple by another Norway maple, I find this week yeah, another one. But I think this one is a male specimen. And this week I learned also why they cut so many Norway maple due to Matt talking. So it was really interesting. But the most promising aspect of canopy cover management I found this week is that many stakeholders care about canopy, NGOs, citizens, corporate institutions, and several city departments. So I feel urban canopy is in good hands. There's many people involved in the purpose of increasing canopy. And as I said, maybe not in my city, but in the other cities we saw this week, the importance of diversity is more and more addressed. But there's a will to increase diversity, but there's a lack of species diversity and genetic diversity in nursery. There's also a lack of knowledge and confidence to plant new species in the harsh conditions of boulevards and compacted soils. Also, we saw that they are planting more and more male specimens, which increase pollen allergies. On the other hand, female trees produce too many fruits and seeds, causing also a disservices. So we need to find a balance between male and female trees and perhaps create new cultivars to mitigate these two disservices. And for another project, research project, we could add to this one is that cities have to limit the quantity of water runoff going to wastewater treatment plants, and tree may help to reduce rainwater runoff. But we need to better know how the effects of species, size, and urban site conditions on the quantity of rainwater runoff avoided to develop equations that be included in the best stormwater management practice.
Excellent. Thanks, Anik. That would bring up Rita Sousa Silva.
She's not there today.
Not with us today.
Okay. Then what about Laura Jean Raymond Leonard?
Yeah, not so bad, Peter. Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah. You know, until now, my research has focused on soil community ecology. So how soil trophic interaction are shaped and how it's influencing local soil biodiversity. So this week was really interesting to bring me back, my focus on tree, because my perspective generally is below ground. So, litter, decaying roots. So to check at the canopy and think about other questions was really refreshing. For me, I think the best thing about canopy was, for me, was the collective effort. I feel, at least in Montreal, but also in the other city, to go forward to increase canopy cover. I feel like many actors in different fields are trying to meet these, canopy cover objectives. So I find this encouraging. But again, the downside for me was a bit like maybe this index of canopy cover is too broad. and maybe dispersion should be more taken into account. And I feel that the biggest downside is probably the inventory. I was shocked to see that some city didn't have still inventory, and I know that it's requiring a lot of resource and everything, but yeah, for me that was a big thing that should be developed, and at least also for the ones that are not accessible. I mean, I feel like maybe cities could be more open to the research field to share the data set about that, so if existing. And going forward, that goes back to soil for me. So I think for me, because we in the lab check more about the biological aspect, and I feel like this week, I feel like that I didn't have some answer about, physical and chemical aspect of the soil. And I feel that this is really important to consider the soil as a whole, again, like the tree, to go forward. So for me, it will be to research the feedbacks effect between soil properties, soil diversity, and trees, and to see how those interact with each other in urban environment, because this is really not study. So I think that could help us to better target management decision. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. Now I'm going to go out on a big limb and grab a long Italian name. Josh Quattrociocchi. How about that, Josh?
That was as good as I've ever heard anyone pronounce it. That doesn't, so very close. It's Quattrociocchi or Quattrociocchi. So honestly, really well done. So for me, I'll go through this really quick. The most promising or like positive aspect of canopy cover that I saw this week, which we saw today, and then also when we went to the Brickworks, is how much the community is really getting involved with increasing canopy cover and maintaining Toronto's forests at least. I'm not sure exactly how it is in the other cities, but I would assume community involvement is kind of increasing across the board. And as one of our speakers said, this is something that, like some of these projects, like in the Brickworks that they restored the ravine there, it wasn't something that they were able to do by themselves necessarily. And when all these different actors act together, they can create a stronger and healthier result. But then on that note too, what was a little bit depressing about canopy cover is that even though it's something that, it is important, but it's not the only thing. But what's depressing is that a lot of politicians kind of seem to cling to canopy cover and just stick to that as their this is our measure of success. And I think a lot of the general public gets their information about whether or not, like Toronto especially, if the forest is healthy or not, they get it from politicians. And if you have a politician telling you, well, great, we're at 40% canopy, it doesn't tell you if it's actually healthy or not. And so I think politicians kind of hugging on to that measure just kind of, it's not teaching the public what they really need to know about the urban forest and how to maintain it. And then the most uncertain thing that I think high priority for research, which we learned a little bit more about today as well while we were talking to Leaf, but it's the equitable distribution of green space in urban centers. Obviously, a lot of green spaces are centered in primarily higher income areas. So the low income areas don't have as many street trees. They don't have access to parks or older parks, older trees. And this is something that I think is a very complicated issue because we've talked about this, and it could invite gentrification as you green the city more and more. So this is something that I think needs a lot of time and attention to figure out how to do it properly to make sure that everyone in the city has access to these green spaces that are important for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh. Caitlin Pike.
Hi. So yeah, what I found the most promising this week is just that these urban forest strategies are like happening, that more and more cities are acknowledging that trees in the city are vital to just the health and the resiliency of the city as a whole and the well-being of people. And it's just nice to see that cities are starting to kind of integrate this into their strategies. and of course, you know, this is happening at different levels and different scales depending on the city. But, I feel like trees used to be more kind of thought of as like an added bonus and amenity, and kind of valued for their aesthetics. So it's really nice to kind of just see these like like kind of more robust urban forest programs happening around Canada. And the one thing that really stuck out to me is like kind of like depressing thing though about canopy cover management, just urban forest management, is the unknowns with like pests and disease, and especially with pests. And hearing from Anthony in Montreal, I think he was located in, but just hearing about, I mean, they obviously put a lot of resources into controlling emerald ash borer. As I've mentioned, I lived in Chicago for a number of years, and they had been fighting emerald ash borer for about a decade. And I think it was last year they just announced that they're going to stop inoculating the ash trees and just let them die and just replace them as they die. And so it's kind of like the unknowns with like invasive pests. There's only so much planning you can do. And, as Kit mentioned, and as we've talked about over the past few days, we only have so many resources, and stuff like that can really like throw a curveball into a strategy that a city has. And we don't know yet how we might like address that. So that worries me. But the one thing I'm really interested for future research definitely is how to involve community members, engage with community members. I'm really interested in just like finding out how people engage with their green spaces, how they show up and are involved in like the decision making surrounding trees. Anecdotally, I definitely feel like the more people are involved in like the decisions in their neighborhood, especially with trees, I've personally seen better outcomes. I know research is starting to point to that too. So I'm definitely interested in further research like that.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Is Anne-Julie with us? Anne-Julie Parent from Laval?
No, she was not. She wasn't here all week.
Okay. Hugo Ouellette?
Close enough. Like Caitlin said and Josh, I think the positive kind of thing I saw this week is that it's not only that the cities have a big plan and they try to like increase the canopy cover, but I think it's more common in some people mind that we have to plant tree to increase that canopy cover. And the only sentence is that like strike a chord in my mind. It was with Daniel Boyer when he told us that an engineer, a street engineer, just asked, can we plant tree there? Like, can we do something? That's something that in the past I think wasn't like used to be done. Like an engineer, a street engineer will just like do the street and that's it, no tree. But that's something that struck me for this week. But in this same kind of way, if we plant tree, we have to follow up on the health of those trees. And I think this is a lack in some cities, but in Montreal, in like the first 2 years, we water them and we see if they die or not. But I think in the first 10 years, we can do something like Matt said, that a lot of those trees can be pruned or managed in certain ways to keep them in certain health and to reduce the risk when they are old of breaking of health issues and other things that will decrease the canopy cover. And the fearful future of the canopy cover, I think, is the Asian longhorn. I think for a study, maybe we are too late for that. I think more genetic biodiversity will be interesting to see if, like, we know that the longhorn will eat everything, but we could do some studies to see if certain species or variation dans la génétique could like be more resistant to these longhorn and do something. But I think it's a little bit too late, but could be interesting.
Okay, thanks, Hugo. Camilo Ordonez, I see you there. Reaching for the microphone.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you, guys. So to be brief, I think the most positive thing about this week is really just working together with you guys and learning from one another and learning from people who are doing really, really great work in the cities where we visited. But beyond that, I think it's quite encouraging that cities are doing a lot, particularly people who deal with trees within local governments, municipal governments specifically. They're writing plans and strategies, measuring how tree canopy cover changes, how it is distributed across the cities, planting a lot of trees, dealing with a lot of pests and diseases. I think the conversation on Wednesday from Anthony from the city of Montreal was quite cool, and that they're bringing a lot of ecological considerations into how they manage trees, and that's quite encouraging. Negative things, we're still losing a lot of trees, sadly. We're still doing very traditional plantings. We plant single trees in kind of long files. We're not really planting trees together. Little forest patches here and there would be nice to see. A lot of cities are really not prepared for climate change or for, you know, biodiversity considerations in the way that they manage trees. And there's a lot of work by non-government kind of stakeholders that is not being recognized. And I go back to the conversation that we have with Philip Van Wassenaar, who deals with heritage tree listings here in Toronto in the GTA, and how he told me that a lot of cities are really not interested in using their heritage tree listings to protecting those trees, and that cities don't really use their listings or that heritage tree approach to protecting their trees. So that was very surprising to me, and that's kind of sad. Major uncertainties. This is something that you guys may know that I'm trying to work on right now. What happens to the ecology of the site when you lose a lot of trees? Specifically, what happens to the wildlife, not just from an abundance and diversity perspective, but from a functional perspective. What happens to the connections with all the birds and the squirrels and all that stuff? We still really don't understand what's the impact of the many trees that we're losing in the city on that ecology, and of course the people as well. I think we really need to understand what are those tree protection and retention measures really doing? Are they really being effective? When we talk a lot about that, you know, tree bylaws are kind of doing their job. We don't really know that, to be honest, and I think we need more research around what these regulations can do in the cities that we visited. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilo. Now at this table, it's Anna Machat.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. So similar to a lot of the cities this week, I think one of the most promising aspects of canopy cover management that we saw going through HRM and listening to other people is that the overall canopy cover does seem to be growing in a lot of cities, although, and just how cities are currently thinking more and more about their management plans and how increasing canopy cover looks going into a changing climate. However, on the opposite end of that, I think one of the more depressing aspects of canopy cover management that we saw in HRM was the lack of aligning protection measures, or although there are tree bylaws in Halifax, a lot of times they're not working as we want them to work because of changing site conditions. And I think that was one of the harder things to see, that even though we do have these bylaws in place, they're not really always working as they were intended. So on that note, looking to future research, I think I'm really interested in how development is changing the site conditions of these street trees in Halifax, and how, even though we have these bylaws in place, what are some of the changes that we can be making with developers to actually increase the vitality and health of these trees that are being planted.
Thanks, Hannah. And that would bring up Maggie Legault. I see your name there, Maggie.
Oh yeah,
There
I'm
you
here.
are.
Hi Peter. Hi everyone. Sorry. Okay, so firstly, having a background more in toxicology, I was pleasantly surprised to see how much urban forests have been put forward in the recent years, and to see how many strategies are put forward by many cities and organizations to improve that canopy cover management. So what struck me the most about urban forests is that the involvement and mostly the union of many organizations that have all the same goal, which is mostly to plant trees in urban area, in municipality, private, and also institutional land. So instead of competing, the vast majority lean together and unite their strength. And I thought it was really great. On the opposite of that, I found it unfortunate that many trees are planted, but most of them are not monitored for many reasons, like a lack of employees or a lack of time. But we met some organizations that do follows up, but it's clear that it's not the majority. So most organizations seems to focus on how much is planted rather than ensuring the survival and increasing yield of the ecosystem. Sorry. And for your last point, my biggest finding of the week is how much the increase in the diversity at the species level is prioritized to counter the planting of monoculture carried out in the recent years. So I have the impression that it's so deeply rooted in our brain that biodiversity improves the functioning of ecosystem, especially when we talk about the functional diversity index, that we don't question it anymore. So for the next years, I think it's time to focus on study at the species level rather than at the community level, to really know more about the yield of individual species that we plant and how this yield is modified when we plant them in combination with other species. So I think we should focus on that before we plant a kind of species that might not even improve the performance of a urban ecosystem. So I think it's with this kind of precision, we would avoid to reproduce the same mistakes that was made in the past and having to review the entire canopy cover management plan in the next 20 years. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Maggie. Is Laurence Côté-Leduc with us?
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay. Julien Leclerc.
Yep. So for my positive thing, I think that there's actually little to be depressed about in urban forestry. I think that urban forestry has been on an upward slope ever since it was conceptualized in the 60s. And with the recent EAB problem, I think it has been an incredible impulse for cities and organisms to organized and to rapidly develop new knowledge to tackle urban forestry problem. So I think what we're seeing now is very positive, and I don't think there is anything to be depressed about. The only negative I have is that I don't think we need a second impulse, and I'm very apprehensive about the coming of the Asian longhorn beetle or any other pest. So for me, that is the one of the biggest problem in the horizon. And lastly, as far as research is concerned, I'm coming from a forestry background, a natural forestry background, and in the science of forestry, how to optimize operation has been well studied. But I don't see that at all in urban forestry. I think it would be interesting to try to involve science in finding ways to optimize urban forestry operation, make them better and better organized.
Thanks, Julien. Bastien Lesigne.
So most of the things I wanted to say.
Can't hear you, Bastien.
Oh, sorry.
Your volume is very low.
Yeah, okay. We'll try to improve it.
No.
it better like that?
A bit better.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, most of the things I wanted to say like were already said, but what I found really motivating is that to see that a few motivated and well-trained people can really change things. And we really see during this week that the scientific knowledge is really diffusing with the managers and everything. So they are really using the concept that we developed, and it's really nice to see. What depresses me, of course, is the threats that still exist for the urban forest. But as Julien said, there's a lot of improvement on that side, and it's still good to see that. And what I think is a good way for research, at least for my interest, is how can we go beyond canopy cover? What type of new indicators can we develop? What type of applications can we use? And how can we improve our inventories of the urban forest to manage it more efficiently?
Okay, thanks, Bastien. What I have next is Sivi Gagnon Kuji. Is that person with us?
Yes.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think that the positive things I can mention is the movement of to increase canopy in the city. Maybe can give us a job, because I think that we have many people who are interested in this domain in French, and I think also they can give us a health and a mental health and physical health, and give us also a social communication, for example, between people, to put together people, and yeah, that is the positive thing, I think. The negative thing is the presence of canopy the presence of canopy can increase gentrification. I don't know the word in French, in English. Can increase the price of house in the city, and it's not good for poor people, and that is the point of my view. The testing, I think, also the presence of canopy. Sometimes I see when the people plant a tree, they can consider the organic matter. They remove organic matter, and and we have a big era of grass. They consider grass. They don't put leaves or organic matter like litter in the soil. That is my point. And at the end, I think that we can increase species in the species of tree in city. That is the point we can think about in the future, how we can increase the species tree in the city. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Is Roman Jaeger with us?
Yeah, yes. So to me, I will not bring a lot of new things, I think, but to me in general, it's very hopeful to see how we recognize more and more the cost and benefits, and that the benefits just overpass the cost of planting trees for most of the people in the planet, let's say. So yes, this is the positive aspect, and we can see that the willingness to increase canopy cover is real. There is a need of collaborative work, and I think we are on this path to the collaborative work. Just if we think about all the students and the postdocs and the professors that were involved in this UFOR summer school. Then the negative, maybe the negative thing is that we have big plan on planting trees, thousands of trees, but it would not be possible if we have like poor soil like we have in urban environment. So yes, this is it. And maybe there is a huge lack of monitoring, even if we are going to have more and more data, but yes, that's a thing. And a priority for research for me will be maybe the ecological restoration of urban environment, maybe the soil, and maybe how to make ecological succession faster in order to get better soil faster and to have trees in better health. And yes, that's it.
Okay, thanks, Romain. Is David Grenier-Ayon with us?
Yes. So yeah, I don't know to which extent I will add to previous people, but for me also it was I see very positively like urban forestry in the future, and I was especially positively surprised by to which extent our view, even for scientists, but also public manager, how the view of the urban forest is beginning to be more holistic, and we see it more as a proper ecosystem rather than a collection of individual trees. And this, and with this, I feel with this sort of view, it aligns with the fact that some goals tend to be more now for increasing canopy quality as a complement to quantity, and I see this very positively. But one thing that maybe is more negative is despite all the good motivation and the highly competent people that are trying to work together, I feel maybe some essential tools are not there quite. For example, regarding consistency and availability of the data among the different cities. And I feel this does not allow to find some common problems that we can work all together on. And this leads to the third point where I feel regarding research, a good thing to focus on maybe how urbanisms affect urban forest as an ecosystem in general, and how we can build or manage better the gray part of the city to sort of make a good template for the forest to be more to have more integrity, I would say, more ecological integrity. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thanks, David. Now here in Halifax, it's Jordan Hahn.
Hello. I think for positive things this week, I would say how prioritized our urban forest managers have viewed canopy equity, and how that seems to be on our urban forest managers' mind. And in the sites that we saw, a lot of it wouldn't have canopy if it wouldn't have been planted in the last few years. So that was really reassuring to see that canopy equity is important here and is practiced in a good way. In terms of depressing things this week, I think it would have to be the sheer amount of canopy that is lost due to political reasons and just the standards being needing to be updated. It seems as we advance in technology and development practices that site suitability for trees is not being considered. And I think that was a little depressing. So on the other hand of that, I believe that research needs to be done in terms of the effectiveness of rebates and incentives and regulations and how we can best bring developers and the public together to consider the urban forest in the very, very beginning planning stages, and it's valued in at least a similar way to how we value it, so that it's considered first, so that we don't run into these issues such as a tree line being too small just because our standards aren't correct. So I believe research into that would be effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Matt, Follett, please.
Cool. Yeah. So I think my happy moments were to hear that what has perhaps been the ethos of our lab for the last many years, the term functional diversity being thrown around by practitioners out there, and I think that was kind of like, yeah, we're getting somewhere. This is pretty cool. Also, the people here and the people we met, the incredible diverse working background, diverse disciplines that are coming into the umbrella of urban forestry, and it's great to see so many varied views and things that we have missed in the past because we have all these new actors playing. So that's been good and always getting better. I'm always a skeptic though, and quite jaded about the industry, and I still think that we tend to pay a fair amount of lip service to some of our future planning. And over the course, I didn't hear a whole lot of 20 years down the road plans. And I have seen for a long time age structure problems where we have aging out in large blocks, and we're still planting big developments in single planting blocks. And I didn't hear anybody say, in 20 years, we're going to come in here and cull half of these trees and replant again. And I think that's one side of the long-term planning that we really need to probably focus on if we want to avoid what we're about to run into in many, many cities here in the coming years as a whole age class ages out. And then provenance, seed source, and production methods, which we've been fighting for years, and we're still tending to put junk in the ground in many cases. And as urban foresters, I think we have the potential to shift the marketplace. I know we're not that much, but we have some demands, and I think we can make more demands and move away from seeing plant names in quotations at the end of a tag because of the impact on genetic diversity. So from an uncertainty point of view, I think that's my biggest uncertainty, is what's going to happen with the plants that are in the ground now, that are going in the ground now, and how can we manage those, and what do we need to do to understand better how to put good, decent quality plant material in the ground that lasts a long time and we're not replacing. So that's it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. And now we have two here in Halifax. We start with Tyler Doucette.
Great. So something that I found promising after a summer of doing field work on municipal urban trees in the streets was how much land non-municipal institutions have that have plenty of suitable space for new plantings to go in, especially in urban cores. Obviously, there's governance challenges with that, but like we discussed, sometimes maybe it's just a case of requiring one tree champion to come in and really green an area. So that's something that makes me excited. On the less excited side of things, I was a little pessimistic about how arbitrary. A lot of our canopy cover goals are in urban forest management plans. I'd hope with all the researchers and resources that municipal governments have and planners have, that they're using more evidence-based decision-making to create targets that are both realistic and optimized and make sense. And then an area for future research that I would like to see, it was brought up by Camilo a couple of times, would be bylaws surrounding private land and non-municipal institutional land, and getting a better idea of what's working right now, what are we doing across Canada, and how to both like incentivize people to retain and increase canopy cover by using bylaws.
Right. Thanks, Tyler. And now it's Zoe Coulter.
Hi. So yeah, one of the things that I found very promising and hopeful is how our municipalities are starting to be more proactive in how they're managing the urban forests, especially on Wednesday when we got to talk to Natalie and to talk about our cyclical pruning program and how the city is now finally starting to maintain their trees proactively instead of just reactively. And one of the things that I found depressing is the mortality rate of young trees, especially related to bad planting sites, and sort of the fact that we're kind of putting trees into spots that won't allow the trees to grow to maturity, or these sites are going to be redeveloped soon, and so the trees will only get to grow for 5 or 10 or 15 years before having to be cut down or moved again to make way for fixing up the infrastructure of the city. And so that's kind of depressing. It would be nicer to be able to put trees in places where we know they're going to grow for a long time, and to increase canopy cover for as long as possible in the city. And one thing that I think would be really interesting for research is to look more at what people actually believe about trees, what citizens want, because I've heard a lot of sort of anecdotal stories. I know there have been studies on this, but I think there should be more about what citizens think about trees, and how, one thing that Natalie brought up is, do citizens like to see a street with all of the same species of trees in a line, or because we know that that's not great from a diversity perspective, but does it look messy to have, do people think that it looks messy to have multiple species of trees, or to have trees in clumps as opposed to in tidy lines? And so I think there should be more research on that, and then use that research to focus education and engagement with citizens in decision-making processes.
Yeah, thanks very much, Zoe. And that brings up Françoise.
So Menelik and I are going to have like the toughest jobs. I'm going to try to go quick and to not repeat what everybody else says, because I think we mostly agree, right? We mostly agree. So I spend most of my time thinking about components of the urban forest where the canopy cover is already 100% or nearly there, and the goal is typically not to increase it. So I just want to say this week has been super enriching in sort of thinking more about those city level indicators that I'm less familiar with. And it has definitely been enlightening. I think, as almost everybody has said, we've all met incredibly motivated and aware citizens. There's mobilization to work and improve the urban forest across a diversity of actors. And in some cases, wonderfully enough, there's political will to do something about it. And I think that's all that is extremely heartening. And I feel like we have this groundswell to work with, and that's very sort of motivating. At the same time, and sort of bringing together both observations about how we treat older trees, aging trees, as well as how we treat young trees, and how, we don't put them in the conditions that are right for them to grow. I think those are both symptoms of a national scale reflex that we have as Canadians, to think of trees as disposable because they happen to be super abundant, as in the case of any other widely abundant resource. We are exactly the same with our water. And so I think that is like our biggest challenge. Is in cities, we tend to see trees as these disposable assets. If I have to identify a silver lining in that, it's that I think across Canada, we all have that exact same problem. And so I think if we can think of solutions, we might be able to find nationwide solutions, because I think that is like the first step. And then just to get back to the specific question of canopy cover, I think before we start thinking about new indicators, I think canopy cover is exactly what happens when you put the indicator first, rather than looking at what the goals are in terms of people and their values. I think we need to do, in terms of research goal, we need to do a much better job of identifying, and not just identifying, but really quantifying the diversity of functions and ecosystem services that we get, both across different components of the urban forest, because I think a street tree does not deliver the same functions as a woodlot tree or a city park tree. And then how those functions change across a tree, the lifetime of a given tree. And so I think once we've quantified that, we can start building a business case for a higher quality urban forest and greater diversity in the urban forest. And that fulfills a broad range of values and not just canopy cover. Anyway, that was my soapbox, Menelik. We got this hot seat now.
Is it actually me, Peter? Then if
Is
so,
there another B?
If Johanna had been here, she'd be next, but Menelik, take it away.
Oof. Yeah, everyone's said everything that needs being said, honestly. But to add my piece to it, I think the thing that I found the most positive to look at was just the extent of partnerships that we were seeing across the city of Toronto, those kind of interconnected projects that are ongoing, many funded by the city, but also working with the various organizations like the TRCA, these other community groups. And that's really promising in my view. On the negative side, the thing that I was thinking about, and I'm not sure if anyone's actually said this, was sort of, this kind of goes into that. It's maybe stems from this lots of partnerships, but that sort of non-centralized way and going about of the management of all of these different spaces. And to me, it would seem that if there's all of these partnerships happening and all this funding coming from the city, that there should be some sort of centralized structure to not only the management, but also the collecting of data, especially if it's public money going into all these different projects. And so I kind of was not as happy as I could have been maybe in the conversations related to how they were pooling all of the efforts that were going, maybe here in Toronto, but maybe in other cities as well. Also, there was a sort of pride in the kind of data that we do have here in Toronto, but I was able to find issues with it pretty quick in my master's, and I'm sure other people will find that to be the case elsewhere. So I think there has to be like a thought process for the long term in how we're conducting this management. Just the example here is that the way the data is being collected, it's being overwritten. Oh, is there an echo? And anyways, yeah, the data is being overwritten every 7 years. So Yeah, and last thing, as far as research, I think people's perceptions and the way they receive the various programs and management that's ongoing from the city, I think that's something that needs to be further researched. And I'm going to stop there because I'm getting tired of hearing my voice and echo.
Yeah, I hope the wind here in our mostly Norway maple canopy is not affecting the sound as it comes into our microphone. I've left it live for most of the time. Do we have Ariane Bello among the? No, okay. Well, that's the end of the published list. So, but we have a couple of people whose names I see and are not on my list. So, Preet. Is Preet there behind the name?
Yep, I'm here. So
there you are.
Actually, I'm sorry for that. I apologize. I didn't get the email like how I have to present today. But from the conversation, I'm not from the forestry background, but from the conversation with the people that I found is forests are important, and there's been effort is going on to save the forest, to plant the new trees, and also to promote the growth and the quality of already present trees. And also there is a conflict going in preserving the older trees, and some people are trying to plant new trees instead of that one. So the concept of heritage trees. So one is that. Another one that I learned is there's a really good relationship of community partnership with the city officials is going on in Toronto, which I never expected back home. And that was really surprising for me to see that one. So yeah, so the partnership is important, and the training and communicating effectively, that is important for urban forestry. That's what I learned in this week. So that is it. Thank you.
Hey, Preet. And is there anybody else among the student and postdoc pool whom I have not called upon?
Can you please repeat the question again?
Sorry?
Can you please repeat the question again?
Oh yeah, is there anybody among the students and postdocs on this call whom I have not called upon to speak?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't
think so. I see Kim.
Kim is Christian's assistant. So she helps coordinate everything with the UFOR school.
Yeah. Got it. So before we turn to the professors and so on, and the Benoits of the world, I would like to, on behalf of those of us who are more or less unilingual, to give my deepest appreciation and thanks to the folks for whom English is not the first language. And it's been very highly appreciated that you would make do the very hard lifting and hard work so that those of us who are really only understanding science and English can participate in this conversation. So thank you very much, especially folks with French as your mother tongue.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, coming from you. Benoit, I wonder, were you out in the field every day?
No, unfortunately, I had to stay in the Ripon at the UFOR this week, so I wasn't in Montreal.
Yeah, so, but you heard all the afternoon conversations. Have you got any perspectives you'd like to lend us?
Haha, so I get the last word.
No, you don't. It's not the last word.
Oh, no, I guess, no, you'll have to send in Peter. Yeah, well, I thought it was really interesting. I learned a lot of different sites that I would never thought of as urban forestry project this week, like the Reclaim Dump in Toronto, which was really surprising to me, and I thought it was very interesting. Some interesting inputs as well on cemeteries yesterday that I thought, like I always would have thought that trees would have been a great place in cemeteries and never thought of them as being a problem. And so a few surprising facts, and especially for me, I'm fairly new to the urban forestry world. I'm more of an ecological forester. So it was very interesting, and seeing the discussions from a lot of the people from, I forget his name, from Toronto, which, what was
You're Amory, yeah.
Yes, Amory. I thought his presentation was really exciting, and see someone working for a municipality that seems to align a lot of his thoughts and objectives on what a lot of the discussions we had. I thought it was very encouraging to see that. And I was encouraged as well by the diversity of students we have in the UFOR program, and I hope everyone enjoyed that diversity of perspectives, and I think it's something we want to encourage within the program, and I hope we get more and more opportunities to organize seminars throughout the next year, and we'll also have a lot more time and to plan next year's field school, hopefully in Charlottetown. So thanks everyone for your participation. And I really enjoyed the few moments I had with you during the online sessions.
Yeah, okay, Benoit, thanks. And now I'm going to put Sandy on the spot and get her to make a contribution to this little conversation.
Thanks, Peter. Had to unmute, you know, I'm a little slow on that. I got it working. I guess I sort of looked at your questions and responded to each of them. You know, I think, I wouldn't say, I didn't hear much that surprised me, unlike Benoit, sorry. I heard the diversity across the country, which was really impressive. I think certainly from Toronto's perspective and what I'm familiar is, I'm really positive about this political engagement, and many of you have already pointed to this, and it's in Montreal as well, Halifax to some extent, and probably Vancouver. I mean, we're all I'm going to use the top down, bottom up, but the top down is becoming aware, and the bottom up is becoming aware, and I'm really optimistic about the meeting in a good place. What I'm less optimistic about, I wouldn't say depressed, because being in urban forestry makes one depressed just in general, I've learned over the years, because there's always problems and you're always facing these challenges. But what sort of was a little more challenging is the different disciplines, and I think some of the students mentioned this. You know, the silos to some extent, and I see them a little softer than they used to be, but they're still pretty entrenched, and it's hard to see how that's going to play out in the long run. Again, I think like Matt said, you know, the timeline, how does that work? Especially the bylaws and development. We saw a lot about the planting and the front end, and we didn't see a lot about the back end. That's why I did ask Philip to talk about heritage trees, because I think the conversation has to be a lot more comprehensive, and thinking about how the different disciplines are actually going to work together. They first have to learn to start talking together, and that's always the challenge. I'd love to see a new metric or metrics to replace canopy cover, I guess. Green is not canopy. I mean, what I asked a couple of places in Toronto was, you know, is this what you call canopy? Because some of it is open meadow, some of it is invasive species. Is that canopy? And, you know, if you just fly over or take the satellite or LiDAR imagery, it's canopy. So that's not, green isn't always canopy. And I think we have to keep moving, that it's much more complex. The other piece that I would love to see a bit more, and I think we have to tackle, is this, and I mentioned it one day, is the commercial nurseries, the commercialization, how that piece fits in with all this wonderful political and public engagement. And then there's the capitalism of nursery production. I can't remember which day it was where someone said, you know, 80% of the nursery material that's produced is for the private landowner. And so municipalities don't have much, that may have been Amory, but they don't have much power or sway over the material that's available, nor the genetics, nor any of those other pieces that go into it. So I've covered a lot of territory there, but I'm very optimistic. Despite being perpetually depressed whenever I go out and walk around streets, I think there's a lot of possibilities, and I think we're all coming to it. We just got to keep working on it, because they're not, urban forestry is not without its challenges. So that's all I would say, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Now, we have Tenley showing up on the screen. And I wonder, Tenley, if you'd like to introduce yourself to this crowd, and if there's any remark along the lines of what we've been talking about that you might like to make.
Sure, thanks. I'm joining the last day, but I'm Tenley Conway. I'm a professor of geography, geomatics, and environment at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. I'm really interested in the ways that different actors, human actors, influence the urban forest. And sort of the questions that Peter put before us, I'm going to answer them perhaps a bit narrowly, given that I'm one of the last ones to go, but also because I only participated in the field today. I think one of the things that was very much a positive is that the Toronto group today, we saw an example of a project that is bringing trees to a property type that traditionally has very little tree canopy cover, so social housing. And I think it was a successful partnership between the City of Toronto, a nonprofit LEAF, and very importantly, residents of the social housing complexes where this project is happening. So it was really nice to see that both community engagement and really the leadership that the community is taking and given the opportunity to take within this project. I guess on the flip side, though, is thinking about how intensive it is or how much time it takes to get one of these projects up and running. We didn't really talk about it today, but I know how many hours of meeting time and dealing with kind of the bureaucratic red tape of different city and other organizations to get all the appropriate permissions to do projects that there were lots of people very excited about, but actually to make it happen. And so just thinking about sort of all of the time it often takes to just plant one more tree in the urban forest is sometimes overwhelming. And then in terms of sort of questions, if today's topic was about equity and spatial distribution, and thinking about making sure that everyone has access to trees or kind of the types of trees, the types of green space they want. I think particularly in a city like Toronto, where outside the downtown core, we have a lot of our population living in multifamily dwelling units, so apartment towers or condo towers that are often surrounded by, regularly mown grass. I think a real challenge is to understand why that is happening, understand the barriers to having trees and other non-lawn grass vegetation, and then thinking about the opportunities to make that happen. Because if one of our goal is to make sure everyone has access to trees in the urban forest more generally, a significant and growing portion of our population is living in multifamily dwelling units. And so how can we bring trees to this growing population so that they can have those experiences every day? And I'm a firm believer that people's past experiences really influence their attitudes, their actions. And so if they have experiences with trees in their everyday lives, they're more likely to themselves become champions of the urban forest. Thanks.
Thanks, Tenley. So happy you could join us here on the last day. So before we take a 5 or a 10-minute break and talk about the next summer schools and what was strong, what was weak about this summer school, I'll give my answers to the questions and say a word or two in conclusion. But I'm going to answer the first question twice. It's my prerogative as the chair to do that, and so I will. So for me, what was the most promising was to be reminded that, I'm going to make a strong statement here, we largely know what we need to do, technically speaking, to increase and improve the canopy. I'm not saying there aren't some uncertainties around, some of the things we do around getting trees into ground and keeping them healthy for a long time and so on. But, you know, the technical side, I think, is developing extremely well from a knowledge point of view. That's from a knowledge point of view. But then I come to the depressing side, where I observe that the barriers to doing what we need to do are depressingly numerous and huge and complex. And so that's a little bit of a downer there, but I'm going to turn that back to the first question, what's promising? This CREATE network is all about capacity building among junior people in the field. And that is so darn important, because we don't have very many senior people in the field, especially in the academy. And so when I look at you know, the transformations in urban forestry that I've seen in the 15 years I've been involved, and the increasing attention cities are paying, the amount of research that's going on compared to what was going on 15 or 20 years ago, then I get very optimistic. And I get optimistic for you folks who are coming through mostly graduate education and your postdocs and so on, because, and I'm not sure where all the employment opportunities will come from, but somehow they're going to be there. And, you know, if you go back to Camilo's talk yesterday about the incredibly diverse array of stakeholders and disciplines and technical competences that are needed, I think the prospects for advanced careers related to urban forests are immensely positive. And you're coming into this at such a wonderful time. So there, the CREATE network is going to do what it's supposed to do, and that is to help you find fulfilling careers in urban forests and prepare you particularly with the knowledge base. The research question, and I have probably several hundred I would like to articulate, but I'm just going to pop up one. And that is, how can we turn the overwhelming love and appreciation urban people have for trees into them making efforts and investments to improve their urban forests? I started my formal research career in urban forests by with Camilo and some other graduate students looking at urban forest values. And one of the first questions we ask people when we stop them, or when we invite them to have a conversation with us on the sidewalk, is how important are trees to you? And people largely put big smiles on their faces and say they're very important. And that is so promising. But maybe it's a bit superficial, because we like it that people appreciate trees. And then if somebody else made the investments of time and money, then their love for trees would be fulfilled. But if we could find ways to get the non-municipal actors to get really excited, like for example, the cemetery managers that we worked with a few years ago with Jess Quinton, and that we went to visit yesterday. Well, we didn't talk to the managers, we visited the cemeteries. How can we excite those cemetery managers to either, where the trees are not very abundant, to get them in the ground and nurture a strong canopy there, but then the other cemeteries with the old forests on them, you know, the next big hurricane is going to take most of those down. And so can we get ahead of the curve and get some trees in the ground beforehand? Because as I said in my opening talk, it takes 5 seconds to lose a huge amount of canopy, but it takes 5 decades to get that canopy back. So we are now at about 3:25 in Halifax. Could we take a 5-minute break so that people can use the loo or get a drink or stretch? And then in about 5 minutes, we'll get back and we'll see how long it takes us to develop some good ideas about what was strong and what was weak in this field school. And I would like to tell you some thoughts about the next one and see how you react. So 5-minute break.
Sounds good.